Module 6, Redefine Impossible. This is it, the last module in the course, and it's a big one. Are you ready to redefine impossible? Nick guides us through the process in this module, including topics like changing impossible to improbable, and then turning improbable into probable, refusing to accept the norm, leveraging desperation to ignite revolution in your own life, and being creative in how you achieve the results you want. Here we go. Let's join Nick for Redefine Impossible.
When I say the phrase status quo, what comes to mind for you? How would you define it? What feelings pop up? What about when I say normal or the norm? What comes to your mind there? Is it a safe, comforting word, or is it a frustrating concept? Maybe a little bit of both? Based on my travels and all of my conversations with people, I feel like the status quo or accepting the norm is one of the most debilitating, deflating attitudes you can ever have in your life. Think about it just for a second. If you want to rise above, to reach a new altitude, to experience results and success and achievements that so few experience, then by its very nature, the norm is exactly what you do not want in your life. The status quo won't cut it for you at all, and the way you've always done it is not the way you want to do it any longer. Let me ask you, do you rise above the norm in your life? Be honest. Do you do more than just think outside the box? Do you actually live outside the box too? Outside your comfort zone? Is your status anything but the status quo? I know how tempting the comforts and familiarity of accepting the norm can be. I know how people and your culture constantly pulls you back to the status quo. There are so many well-meaning people who act and look happy and successful on the surface, but behind all of that, they never reach their dreams because they settle for what's being determined as normal for their life. It's a dark place, really. And it's that darkness that most people actually seem oblivious to. I know how to break free from all of that, to rise above and live a life way beyond the norm. I want to shine a light on this darkness. I want this to be a wake-up call. Ready? The norm does not have to be your norm. The way it's always been doesn't have to be the way you do it. The same old thing doesn't have to be your thing. You need to redefine impossible and start turning it into what is possible and even probable. Impossible is a word I've had to come to grips with my entire life. You can imagine how often I've heard the word impossible, Nick. I've noticed people actually misuse this word quite a bit. People often say impossible when what they really mean is improbable. If someone says, it's impossible for the Cowboys to come back and win this game in this wonderful game of football. No, what they really mean is it's improbable. They probably won't do it. You see it play out in your life all the time, I'm sure. It's impossible for me to hit the deadline. It's impossible for me to run a marathon. It's impossible for me to go on a diet over the holidays. These are simple examples, but I bet you've used the word impossible this way before too. Clearly, these scenarios are not impossible. They just seem improbable. They speak to your attitude, your work ethic, your values, and your priorities more than anything. Here's the approach I want you to take the next time you hear the word impossible. Ask yourself, is that really impossible or just improbable? I bet the answer is that it's improbable most of the time. Then ask yourself, okay, if it's just improbable, then I have to admit that it's still possible, right? At this point, you've gone from impossible to improbable to possible. When you start thinking in terms of possibilities, your whole world opens up. If you can think of something as possible, then it doesn't take much to figure out a way to make it probable. It actually brings you back full circle to where this course started. And that's changing your mindset. In this module, you're going to push that thinking to the edge. So, let's talk through how to think about what's possible and what's probable in your life. You must make an effort to incorporate possibility into your thinking on a consistent basis. Think in terms of possibilities. Having a possibility first mindset will help you take action. Once you take action, you'll quickly discover what's probable for you, and it will shape your goals and your vision for your life, as well as how you spend your time. It's a muscle you have to develop, but once you do, it's a strength that cannot be second guessed. Once you're thinking in a realm of what's possible and what's probable, you're ready to rise above the norm and take on a more creative approach to accomplishing your goals. A byproduct of this thinking is that you're focused more on positive things, which makes you generally happier. I'm not saying a positive attitude is everything, no, but listen to this. In your life, the norm is established in three main ways. First, what naturally happens. Second, from other people, especially those closest to you. And third, what's been done before. The norm is always there because that's what it is. It's the norm. It happens on its own. It's there without any help from you or anyone else for that matter. It's constantly around you. Before I talk about how to break free from the status quo in your life, I do want to distinguish those norms that are helpful. I think of these more as routines and rituals. Having a pattern for how you take on a certain project or conduct a certain task can be smart and productive. Having rituals in your life or habits that help you prepare your mind and your body for what lies ahead is very important. My self-assessments that I do every 6 months are a good example of that. Processes and routines can be very helpful, but even they need to be questioned from time to time. You can find a norm in anything in life. Look at bullying, for example. People bully other people because there's always been a bully in life. And since it's always happened and it's always been around, it must be okay to tolerate it. Or how about this one? The thought that everyone has sex before marriage. That's just the norm. That's what everyone does. Well, that's not okay to me. That's not my norm. The norm doesn't have to be your reality, especially when that norm flies in the face of your principles and values. That's the beauty of being different. And we're all different, by the way. The real norm in this life is that you're different and you're unique and you're called to a distinct purpose. You get to discover and define your own limitations. No one knew the limitations of Nick Vujicic until Nick Vujicic found his own limitations for himself. It's important for you to recognize in your life where the status quo comes from so that you can handle it more easily. More than anything, the people in your life shape what seems normal in your life, especially those closest to you. Those who love you, care about you. You can sometimes know that, they're protecting me, but what you really want is encouragement. My parents did this when they discouraged me from speaking as a profession. It's not that they didn't want me to succeed or be happy. They were just worried for me and wanted me to be safe above all else. I wanted encouragement, but I didn't get it. Because these people are so close to you, their voice is strong in your life. Your values often come from your parents and your family. Later in life, you may reshape your values a bit based on your friends and colleagues. And sometimes, if you're a parent, other parents can also have prominent voices to shape that as well. All these voices, as well-meaning as they all will be, are susceptible to settling for the status quo. In fact, you have to assume that's what is happening until they can prove otherwise. They don't know they're doing it, but they are. On the other hand, you may be guilty of doing the same for one of your friends or family members. So keep an eye out for that one, my friend. You must learn to filter these voices and the half-truths or discouraging words that come from them. Process the advice and the guidance and make sure it lines up with what you want and where you're going. Maybe your ability to rise above is threatening to them. Whatever it is, you can't let it slow you down. Similarly, our culture is filled with plenty of voices that mistakenly shape your thinking based on the status quo. Facebook, television, websites, videos, magazines, they all keep the status quo in front of you in a completely unprecedented way. Finally, the third factor that establishes the norms around you is what's been done before. We all love to dream, but people are typically only able to think in terms of what's already being done and not what could be done. There was a time when people thought running a 4-minute mile was impossible. Then Roger Bannister did it in 1954, and since then, there are at least 492 known people who have run a mile in less than 4 minutes. I definitely wasn't one of them. But if Roger Bannister had accepted that a 4-minute mile could not be run, maybe those other 491 people never would have either. But now, it's definitely no longer seen as impossible or even improbable. In fact, it's relatively common. For you, your own personal experiences and history may form the chains of what's normal for you. You may have scars from the past that feel impossible to escape. You may have grown up in a town where people generally didn't expect to do great things, where everyone settled. Whatever it is, take a long look at it and shine a light on it. Then decide that you will not let it be your norm. One norm that you must overcome is that failure is the end. You know by now that I don't believe that. Failure is a step in the process. Look at how Post-it notes were invented. I don't know if you know this, but the inventor set out to create a super sticky adhesive, but instead created a very low sticky adhesive. So he applied it to paper and reapplied it over and over, and Post-it notes were born. Penicillin was only discovered because someone left the lid on a Petri dish open, and the exposure created a mold that led to the discovery of this life-saving medicine. Even potato chips were created by mistake. The story goes that a restaurant customer kept complaining that his fried potatoes were too soggy. So the cook got so fed up with him, he sliced those potatoes so thinly and everyone had never seen it before, and he cooked them up and threw them on the plate. I love potato chips, and I'm so glad that customer was rude. For these people, failure wasn't just a step in the process. Failure actually produced the best result. I'll never forget when I went to Singapore, and that's a long flight from Los Angeles. I was quite jet-lagged and felt ill-prepared for a speech. I got up there, spoke, and I got off that stage feeling like, man, I didn't do a good job at all. Years later, now going back to Singapore, I've now heard that I was the first disabled speaker to ever speak on stage in Singapore, and now the whole country is okay and actually now is even looking for disabled speakers from Singaporeans. A disabled person speaking in Singapore was not the norm. I went to Singapore thinking I failed. And I tell you, man, I'm so glad that with that failure anyway, the best product and result for the whole country came from a failed speech. Maybe there's a failure you've experienced recently in your life that could be similar or the same. Maybe you've discovered your own personal post-it note. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be profound or something that can change the world, but it can change you. Most of what I've achieved seems impossible to the normal mindset. And yet, when people meet me, see what I've accomplished, and get to know me, they don't just think what I do is impossible, but they think it can be probable. And then they start thinking that way for themselves too. My whole life is a testament to refusing to accept the norm, to accept that anything is possible. In the face of all the opposition, I realized it was my tenacity that I had to bring out, and my resilience, and my persistence. It wasn't about trying to prove others wrong. It was about proving myself right when I wanted to believe in new heights for me and my purpose. That was my motivation, and I had to learn how to navigate through that negative influence and take wisdom in the midst of it all, while leaving behind the pessimism that totally puts out the fire of your passion and your dreams. You've heard the phrase, "You're known by the company you keep." There are some people that you simply shouldn't hang out with. You take on the influence of those around you more than you think. If there's someone in your life that isn't building you up, helping you become more, then you have to